Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to dive deep and uncover the really fascinating rise and, honestly, the devastating fall of a maritime empire that's been largely hidden away in the historical sands of northern Sri Lanka. We're talking about a story packed with fierce warriors, brilliant scholars, vast international trade networks, and ultimately a tragic colonial conquest. Seriously, if you think you already know the history of global trade, this erased empire might just change your mind.
So, we have to ask, how exactly does a kingdom born from the music of a blind harpist transform into a global economic powerhouse, only to seemingly vanish from the map? Let's dive right into this mystery. Section 1. The Legend of the Harper. The Mythic Origins of Jaffna. Okay, so according to tradition, a blind Tamil harpist from India named Viragavan traveled to the island. He was an absolute master of the yaj, which is a traditional harp. As the story goes, his music so completely enchanted the local king that he was actually gifted a sandy tract of land called Manatridal. The harpist then brought his people over to settle this land, and they transformed it into Yajpanam, which literally translates to the place of the harp-playing bard. Just imagine that for a second. An entire kingdom's identity, completely rooted in art and culture.
Section 2. Birth of a Kingdom. From Chaos to the Aryachakravartis.
Now, long before the kings arrived, ancient Naga settlements were already thriving here, way back around 5000 BC in places like Kondarodai. But the modern political landscape was violently reshaped in 1215 CE when a chieftain named Maga of Kalinga invaded, basically throwing the entire island into chaos. Well, this chaos triggered an intervention from the incredibly powerful South Indian Pandyan Empire. By 1262, the Pandyans had killed off a rival invader named Chandra Bainu, and by 1270, they installed their own trusted general to rule the north. And that moment right there marked the official founding of the Arya Chakravarti dynasty.
What's really crucial to understand here is that these new rulers, the Arya Chakravartis, held a very unique dual identity. Claiming descent from the holy pilgrimage city of Rameshwaram, they were identified as Brahma Kshatriyas. Basically, this meant they were brilliant Brahmin scholars, but at the exact same time they were fierce martial warriors. It's quite the combo. To secure their growing power and really optimize their trade routes, they moved their capital from Singainagar to Nallur. These specific traits, deep intellectualism backed up by serious military might, would go on to define their entire dynasty.
Section 3. An Empire of Trade. The cash-driven maritime hub.
Picture this. You're looking out off the coast of Kerala in the year 1344. That's exactly what the famous Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta did, and he was utterly astonished. He counted 100 ships of varying sizes anchored right there in the water, and every single one of them belonged to the king of Jaffna. This was a kingdom with massive naval reach.
And unlike the more feudal land-based economies operating down in the south of the island, Jaffna was running a highly monetized, entirely cash-driven economy. They were exporting elephants to India through the port of Kates, they controlled super lucrative pearl fisheries, and they practically monopolized the trade of cinnamon, spices, and gems with West Asia and Yemen. On top of all that, they were even doing brisk commerce with Ming Dynasty China and East Africa. Jaffna was, without a doubt, punching way above its geographic weight.
Section 4. The Golden Age. Nallur, the good city.
So let's talk about their capital, Nallur. It wasn't just some military stronghold. It was an absolute masterpiece of urban planning. Inside its heavily fortified walls, it was incredibly cosmopolitan. If you were walking through the city back then, you'd see the royal palace sitting right next to the Great Temple, which is just a perfect symbol of how they fused the spiritual with the political. They had dedicated quarters for a really diverse population of Brahmin scholars, poets, warriors, and wealthy traders. They even built these elaborate stables for their prized elephants and horses.
And their spiritual wealth totally matched their material riches. Later on, Portuguese records noted, with what was clearly sheer astonishment, that over 500 Hindu temples dotted the kingdom. Saivism was the state religion, and they had 4 massive temples standing as symbolic guardians right at Nallur's main north, south, east, and west gates.
But you know how history goes. Extreme wealth makes you a massive target, right? By the early 15th century, at their absolute zenith, they found themselves getting squeezed between 2 expanding superpowers. From the north, the mighty Vijayanagara Empire essentially forced Jaffna to become a tributary vassal. Then, taking advantage of those weakened ties, the formidable Parakama Bahu VI of Kate launched campaigns from the south, completely subjugating Jaffna between 1450 and 1467.
Even though they did eventually regain their autonomy, the kingdom's golden age was definitely beginning to crack.
Section 5. The Portuguese Conquest. The end of the Arya Chakravarti line.
Now we get to the truly dark part of the story. To find the Portuguese came at an absolutely devastating cost. In a brutal show of resistance, King Kenkili I actually massacred up to 700 Parava Catholics who had been brought in to control the pearl fisheries. Obviously, the Portuguese retaliated, and by 1591 they installed a puppet king. But the final death throes really came in 1617 when a usurper, Kenkili II, seized the throne through a bloody palace massacre. When he tried to step up and confront the colonial power, a massive land army of 5,000 Portuguese troops led by Felipe de Oliveira just crushed his forces in June 1619. Kenkili II was captured, hauled off to Goa, and beheaded in 1621. And just like that, the surviving royals were forced into Catholic orders, deliberately severing the Arya Chakravarti bloodline forever.
The before and after of this event is just staggering. Before 1619, you had the famous Saraswati Mahal Library preserving centuries of invaluable Tamil literature, right alongside those 500 active temples. But after the conquest, Captain Major Felipe de Oliveira ordered systematic destruction. That great library was burned entirely to the ground. And on top of that, excessive colonial taxation forced the surviving population to literally flee to India or the Vani districts. So this conquest wasn't just a simple change of leadership. It was the physical, deliberate erasure of centuries of culture and architecture.
Section 6. Legacy in Stone. What the Ruins Whisper. So after the Portuguese, the Dutch took over the fort in 1658, and then the British came in, transforming the city further into the urban center we see today. But here's the amazing thing. The original kingdom literally refused to stay buried. Modern archaeological digs are continuing to pull these stunning artifacts right out of the soil. We're talking fragments of Ming Dynasty porcelain, Greco-Roman and Persian currency, early Pandian coins, and incredibly old punchmark coins dating all the way back to the 5th and 6th centuries BCE. These objects are giving us hard, physical proof of a cosmopolitan empire that deeply connected the ancient world, completely bypassing the localized barter systems of its neighbors.
The physical buildings may have been burned, the royal line may have been severed, and their trade networks hijacked, but as the source material for this explainer so beautifully puts it, the Portuguese destroyed much, but they could not erase the memory of 4 centuries of Tamil sovereignty in northern Sri Lanka. That unique identity forged by those Arya Chakravarti warrior scholars remains deeply, deeply embedded in Sri Lankan Tamil consciousness today. It's the memory of a time when their ships proudly sailed to China and Africa, and Nullar's temples gleamed in the sun.
And that leaves us with this really powerful thought. How does a lost maritime empire continue to shape the cultural soul of an entire people centuries after its physical erasure? It reminds us that history isn't just about what survives above ground. It's about what lives on in a culture's memory. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.